You're listening to Lead the Shift. Each month, I sit down with leaders who can name the moment with clarity and point to the actions that actually move systems. We talk about what's breaking, what's emerging, and what will it take to build a future-proof economy with young adults at the center. If you're ready to lead, welcome home. Christina, I am so excited to have you join Lead the Shift. As you know, Lead the Shift is a component of a newsletter at Leaders Up where we really bring folks that we work with, young people that we work with, stakeholders like yourselves, deeper into the Leaders Up story and strategy so that we can collaborate and think and dream boldly and be revolutionaries. We know the revolution shouldn't be televised. We also know that folks need at times like this some inspiration, some guidance, some bold thinking. And I'm super excited to have you join us, Christina. We have been partnering over a decade plus in ensuring that young people, low wage workers, and talent across our communities that have been historically marginalized really have access to the opportunities, the platform to raise their voice, to fight for the rights. And this new deal that we talk about so many times, the compact between talent and industry, to ensure that we all have access to the American dream, the California dream, and most importantly, our own community's dreams to live a lifestyle as an alignment with our aspirations, our goals, and our values. So Christina, I'm super excited to have you here. Could you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. I am so thrilled to be here with you as well and just feel really honored to even witness all of the work that you've been doing over the past decades that we've known each other. I am an independent consultant. I run a boutique consulting firm, Christina Garcia Consulting. And in that, I partner really deeply with nonprofits and philanthropy, primarily within the kind of economic justice space. My background is that I am really somebody who spent most of my career working inside of institutions, doing systems change work, helping kind of advance effective and innovative policies and helping build the capacity of real proximate providers that know best what solutions really work in community and really trying to create that bridge between kind of what we know works in community and how does that translate into policy and scaled resources and interventions. And so as part of that, I'm also really focused on strategy as well as continuous learning and really effective learning loops, not only within individual organizations from a programmatic and organizational development perspective, but also from a systems change and scale perspective. How do we continue to learn what works in community so that we can share that with others and have a real dynamic orientation to what it means to be sustainable? How do we continue to create and innovate and learn what works as the world is kind of continues to rapidly change around us? And how do we deepen our orientation to understanding the power that we hold collectively in community to drive and lead that change? So it's really reflecting what communities want. And that's the bulk of my work. And then in addition to that, I have the real joy of doing a lot of executive and leadership coaching. So how do we as individuals, as humans, show up ourselves as part of that change, right? So we want to believe and lead that change externally. And part of that is like, we need to be able to lead and imagine that change within ourselves. And so that's a little bit about kind of the work that I do. I am a native Californian. I'm based in the Bay Area. I love my state and have been really committed to working here as well as nationally, but I'm just super excited to be here with you today.
I'm excited too, Christina, because over the years of us knowing each other and working alongside of each other, we've been able to really form community. And I just want to double click on that word. What does community mean to Christina? And I'm not talking about the work I'm talking about that warm, safe place where you can be exactly who you are, leverage your superpowers, and receive the type of love that you deserve, and channel out the type of love that you feel safe enough to actually um, gift to other folks.
Yeah. I mean, you just defined it right there, Jeffrey. That is thank you for answering your question. That is what community really means to me. I mean, as you were asking that question, you're like not in the work. I was like, it is about being seen and feeling belonging, believing and experiencing that kind of your gifts and your value, your perspective is valued and matters and is important in your day to day life, in the kind of support that you have with others, both in an ability, as you were talking about that, it made me think about the importance of not just being able to give your superpowers, share your gift, but also about being in community in a way where you feel welcomed and have the power to receive, right? Community allows you to both give and rest, right? To be human is to be both amazing and have gifts, but also to be flawed or to need space to replenish, re-nourish yourself and get the support that you need, get the thought partnership, right? That you can kind of go and share with others, the ability to be able to ask for help. That is incredibly important. To be able to be vulnerable is what community means to me, both in being vulnerable and offering your gifts and talents and dreams, and also vulnerable in receiving help and asking for help and support.
Hmm. And it reminds me of Dr. King's definition of the beloved community, a
Mhm.
community where all basic needs are being met, absent of poverty, absent of hate, absent of, again, barriers that impede our access to Maslow's hierarchies of needs, what we
Yeah.
all need for genuine human development so that we can not just support ourselves, but work as community to build opportunities and access points for everyone.
Yeah.
Which brings me to this conversation around equity. And equity for years now have been, I would say, a buzzword catchphrase, but something that we hold deeply because we understand that equity is the superior growth model across our nation and across this world. And when everyone has access to the opportunities that they need to be successful, the world will be a better place for all of us to experience from a sustainability standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and even a societal standpoint, most importantly. But let's just be real. What are the things that you feel that equity that we've celebrated too soon? And what's ahead of us in this journey towards really experiencing and sustaining a more equitable community society that we live in?
Hmm. I have to start by saying it is never too early to celebrate. It is never too early to celebrate. I think that that celebration and that joy is fuel
Mm-hmm.
for our work. It's
Yeah.
not closure. And I think that's part of the mistake that we make is confusing progress with permanence.
Mm.
So, like we celebrate milestones like they're completions. And I think that's the trap because equity work is never done,
Mm.
right?
The journey.
It's more like maintaining a house, right? If you stop the upkeep, the structure is going to deteriorate and the people living in it pay the price. We have to keep going and remain vigilant in sustaining and the upkeep. So we've got to keep celebrating. We probably don't celebrate enough, right? How do we celebrate the joy of working together, of working in community, in collaboration, to celebrate how we do work differently in order to be and realize the world that we want to see, right? And we can't mistake that for being done. And I think that's the piece is that, you know,
Mm.
young people end up paying for that confusion of permanence over progress. They continue to inherit these systems that at certain moments in time we claim have been fixed: education, employment pathways, housing, safety. I mean, like, we can celebrate the civil rights movement and we're watching all of that get undone every day. And then, what happens is we act surprised when these old patterns like reassert themselves. So too often we end up changing language, but not
Mm.
really changing the rules or the true embodiment or enforcement of those rules.
Yeah, and it's almost like we talk about like boundaries in our lifestyle. Like what I learned in therapy is that boundaries are not for other folks to
That's right.
manage. Boundaries are for ourselves, right? And when
Mhm.
boundaries start managing other folks, they become rules, right? So this is this standardization that you speak about that we need to have around celebration, celebrating the incremental progress. We got to name it in order to celebrate it, right?
100%.
And naming things that, based upon your experience across philanthropy, workforce development, education, the public sector, what are some of the things that you feel are fundamentally remaining undone as it relates to young people experiencing equity, especially from an economic and community lens?
What remains undone? I mean, I think, I think about like what feels most urgent, right? Or what's becoming undone. This is such a challenging moment that we're in. Why at the beginning of every year it feels like it's another challenging
Hmm.
moment. And so, I think the moment continues to be dangerous,
Yeah.
and it feels like that danger is increasing, but it's still possible to build something better, right? I think
Mhm.
really hope is the discipline that keeps us organizing, right? We want to be able to honor the kind of moment and the danger that we're in without surrendering possibility. And it makes me really think, for me, I think what feels most dangerous right now is like how quickly harm is becoming normal, especially
Mm.
like harm to people's bodies and to belonging, right? Or watching fear continue to get operationalized. We're seeing expanded enforcement, intimidation, the surveillance, and racism being rebranded as common sense, right? I think that this, you can really see this in places like LA, where you are. Young people can feel that tension in their neighborhoods, in their schools, in their workplaces. And so for me, like right now, hope is critical. And I think that's what's really hard right now for so many young people. The threat isn't abstract, right? It's like whether you feel safe in public, whether your family feels secure, whether your identity is being politicized, whether your future is affordable. Dr. King's moral reckoning isn't theoretical, right? It's a choice point. Do we double down on dignity, or are we choosing to normalize cruelty? And I really want us to choose dignity with urgency
Yeah, and respect, right?
and respect. Yeah.
I think about often how in the beloved community that Dr. King um, envisioned,
Mhm.
which was really revolutionary when we think about this in the history of America, in the context of American history, right? Where everyone has what they need to move from survival to thriving to flourishing, right?
I mean, like, why is this radical, right? And it is.
Right. And it's radical because it pushes against the status quo,
Hmm.
right? Um, and one of the follow-up questions I have is around, as we are protecting and supporting young people, are there other things that are urgent to you that we need to do? When you think about some of the experiences, the exposure, the opportunities that were systematically available to you
Mhm.
or conditionally available to you because of the privilege of the family that raised and supported you into the dynamic woman that you are now. Um, what are some of those things that we have to make sure uh, are not undone? Because a big theme of what you were talking about earlier was like how um, there is a commitment to operationalizing, undoing the progress that we've made towards equity.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, I really appreciate this question. I sit with and I reflect a lot as you were talking about kind of just like my own personal lived experience, like being someone that's of mixed ethnicity, right? I've had the opportunity to like really experience both like the privilege and the othering, the belonging and the othering. And so there are some things where I've really had privilege and other places where I've really been able to experience the other side of that, right? And it gives me a particular perspective. Many of us are of mixed background and have this perspective, but there's something about that that really allows you to kind of have a deep experience of both sides of this, and it makes me hyper aware of the privilege that I've had. And I think that's a lot of what drives me in my work is like,
Mhm.
how does that become something that is normal for everybody to receive that type of privilege, to even grow up in the kind of really thriving integrated neighborhood that I grew up in East San Jose? It's like that was a beautiful experience. So I walk through life having, certainly through child's eyes, an experience of a true, inclusive, thriving community where there was economic mobility for immigrants and Black and Brown people in my community, for myself, And so I think part of what you're talking about, Jeffrey, and what we love to talk about together is like systems,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Right. This is what we're really talking about is systems and systems change work. And, Dr. King's beloved community was structural, right? It's
Mhm.
not symbolic. So we've got to really talk about systems and we've got to talk about what powers them. Because before we even get to policies, these systems are driven by beliefs, right? And so when we're talking about undoing,
Yeah,
one belief that I think is really important for us to name, and I'm glad you said this before, it's like we've got to name things in order to be able to do something about them. And I think one belief is that, institutions still behave as if young people, especially Black and Brown young people, are like problems to be managed and
mm,
not experts in their own lives and co-creators of solutions. Like if we actually believe in self-determination and self-determination matters, if we believe that designing together leads to better outcomes, then we have to stop treating youth input like a nice to have.
yeah, yeah,
Start really treating it as essential intelligence, right? Like
yeah,
that belief shift changes everything, right? Like I've had the privilege of people like believing that I have self determination and can do what I want to do and can be a co creator. And I think that's every young person needs to have that experience and have it be real and not kind of dismissed, right? So when we then get to the systems that shape our daily lives, right? Like the education to career pathways, like the hiring and workforce systems, housing and transportation, like all of these, like our criminal and legal justice system. Um, like the real action is in the tools those systems use, right? Because the tools decide who gets in or who is out. Like these things like eligibility
yeah,
screens, gatekeeping criteria. I think about like unpaid internships and these unpaid labor hoops that you ask certain people to kind of have to navigate culture fit expectations, all of these compliance requirements. These rules shape who has access to mobility as well as stability, right? Like who gets to thrive and flourish and who doesn't. And so I think those are the pieces. Like, what does it look like when we start fundamentally designing and approaching this in a different way, where we actually believe that every single person in our society, and particularly young people, know what they need?
Yeah.
And that if we listen to them and actually act in service, in stewardship, things are going to be so much better, right?
Mhm.
Like our policies change, right? We talk about Dr. King's beloved community, and like we're like also right there on like bell hooks and like the
Yeah.
concept of love. Like this is what like love in action really looks like.
Yeah, and Christina, I have to just say publicly, and I've said this to you many times, and I mean it deeply, that you love hard those that have been able to build the trust to experience your love, but also you bet on love. And let's peel the curtain back a little bit further and talk about our first exchange,
Mm,
because I believe our first exchange really symbolizes and illustrates, more importantly, this conscious decision where leaders can take um, and make the choice of detouring from the status quo
mhm.
in order to build a more effective, transformative collective vision. So just share a little bit about our origin story, because I believe it is, quite frankly, it illustrates the type of decisions we need to make as leaders to bring young people in to the co-design process.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What a wonderful moment, right? Like I love looking
Yeah,
back.
curveball, my bad.
I love looking back at that moment, and I think what you're talking about here is right, like a real commitment to intentional decision making, intentional choice making, right? Like as leaders, it's easy for us to default to like this is how it's done, right? This is how it's always been done, and so I am following that rule without recognizing that actually what we're doing is making a passive implicit choice. How do we, to the fullest extent possible, become more conscious of every choice that we are making and understanding it is a choice that we have, and as leaders with influence and power within the current systems, those choices take on a lot of meaning, right? I We met when I was in philanthropy. I had been inherited a portfolio of grantees, and my director came to me and I think it was like a final report that you all had done. So like I had not even kind of your grant that you had received at Leaders Up like was not even on my radar. It just kind of came to me. It was not part of this charge of things I was building. It was like this wrap up, and the CEO is going to come in to have a meeting with us to like do a wrap up conversation around this report. And so my director invited me in because I was kind of responsible for closing out your grant, I think. And I will start there, that one of the things that was always really important to me in philanthropy was like, I actually want to honor the fact that you are coming in, that you've had this grant, that you've put in work to be developing a report for us, whatever it asked you to say, right? That takes time and energy. So I want to read that report. I want to be able to actually meet you again, love, community, belonging. I want to be able to see
Yeah,
your work and appreciate what you are
you
doing.
prepared to engage.
I prepared to engage, right? And we had a great meeting with the director. And the whole time I'm listening to you go through the report and do the voiceover and learning more about what you're all about and what the organization is all about, I'm like, this is a great report. Right? It raises important questions and challenges for the model that was like being scaled. And it was clear to me that this was not the core of your work. And so it just made me really curious. I think you're coming in prepared. I wanted to be able to really listen, right? So it's like
Hmm.
preparation and actually listening so that I can learn something from you. And what became really apparent to me is that, like, you had a vision and ideas that went far beyond this particular scope that you were doing with us. And I remember we wrapped up the meeting, right? The director needs to leave. We've hit the hour. It's probably time for both of us, all of us, to like move on to the next thing. And we were certainly getting kicked out of the conference room, right? And I remember asking you if you had some more time and if you could keep talking. And you were like, yeah. I was like, all right, let's go to my office. And we sat down. And I don't know how long it took me, but I do remember looking at you being like, okay, so what do you really want to do? This was great, but what do you really want to do? And let's talk about how could potentially support that.
And it's so interesting because even when we think about and reflect on that moment, it illustrates what we have to do now. As it relates to ensuring that we're engaging young people as co-architects, co-designers, leaders, movement builders that will help us resist the undoing and also create a future that is more in alignment and even further beyond what King
Yes.
envisioned around the beloved community. I mean, you like framework. I love a framework. So at the end of the day, we're talking about these systems. The nuggets that I pull from our own experiences that when you were prepared to engage. So
Mhm.
as we are challenging the status quo and redefining systems of harm and the systems of hope and opportunity, how are we positioning ourselves through preparation so that we can, number one, arrest our own biases,
Yes.
and number two, be able to listen with the intention of learning and being curious, right?
Right. Right. Like it's that idea of being in dialogue that I love so much. Like, are you listening deeply enough to be changed? Which actually is a really beautiful way of saying, like, are you listening enough to learn?
Exactly.
Right? Like, are you willing to learn? And I think this is one of the hardest things within our systems is giving up this, what is truly an illusion of control. Right. And I think that's in our first meeting, I could have approached that very differently from a like control and power perspective as the person who was kind of overseeing what kinds of grant recommendations I was going to make, right? And a lot of folks, adults within the systems, hold on to power and control. And they believe that that is better, right? That like fewer people having control, determining what other people need versus really understanding, again, that beloved community. If we all have what we need, if we all are allowed to thrive, that's not competition. That's greater creativity, that's greater innovation for everybody. And I think that's where our systems and our institutions continue to get tripped up is they have been designed, right, in this undoing that we're trying to advance, they've been designed to hold power and hold control.
Yeah.
It's an illusion, right? So it's like I don't that's another conscious choice in this framework. It's like coming prepared, listening, because actually power for me comes from the collective,
Hmm.
right? Like we all bring something different. We all know something different. What happens when we get together and we combine those things? We can have a sum that is greater than the parts and can work for everybody. But that we have to be willing to allow different voices and people to come in and accept that they may choose something different.
Absolutely. And be able to pivot, be able to honor their interests. That's one of the other things, I've learned with you and from you is this power of cross sectoral leadership
Mhm.
being a game changer for building the collective power necessary for us to really transform systems. And, one of the things that I would love to hear your thoughts on as we think about and reflect on how our first meeting is illustrative of forming collective power,
Mhm.
because that was just the catalyst to a decades worth of partnership and field development and, dare I say, kick-ass work that is really challenging the status quo. Yeah, I'm just going to say it. It's been a fantastic, revolutionary ride. When I think about now and translating, the lessons learned and the framework from our first meeting of being prepared, you know, leaning in to listen, and then inviting folks in to share power. How can we be more intentional about sharing power
Mm.
and building power with young people in order to, and the beloved community now is the first down. The
Mhm.
goalpost is far beyond that now as we think about how the world has evolved. But what are some of the things that as leaders we can do now to intentionally share power with young adults to build a much better future than the one that we inherited?
Mhm. You know what you're saying, it makes me think of like earlier as we were talking about kind of like what is still to do or what did we celebrate too early. And I was saying like, sometimes we just change the words and like we're not actually changing the rules. I also want to acknowledge that like changing words matters,
Mm,
right? Words themselves have power. It's not enough, but it's the narrative in which we understand the world. It's how we relate to one another. And I want to name that as well because I think you are doing such an amazing job. I really admire how you are always intentionally kind of shifting and continuing to evolve your language as a leader in the field. And even this question is changing the framing because you're changing the language. You didn't ask me about youth voice. You asked about youth power, right? And I think that I'm like right there. It's like we're already shifting what we're talking about or the meaning of what we are trying to achieve, right? Because a lot of people talk about youth voice, but far less actually talk about youth power. And real power means shaping decisions, not just being consulted, right? It's not just a listening session. Power, as you know, through some of our kind of collaborative work, power looks like seats with votes, budget authority, controls over the metrics of success. Like, how often, who is it that's deciding what metrics are determining, like, what outcomes, what looks like success? Does that have any meaning for young people in reality, right? As well as just the practical ideas of the ability to negotiate the conditions of your work,
mhm.
right? So it's like that's where power sits. And I think, again, this is like, if you believe
Yeah.
that young people are essential intelligence, then how are we using the tools that kind of govern this kind of power? How are we using them to make sure that young people are in those seats, right? This is our governing structures, funding rules, accountability mechanisms. And it's like when those tools change or we use them differently, right? And I think that's probably maybe even more important. We get to choose how we use these tools.
Mm,
We can use them to welcome people and create more belonging, or we can use them to close doors. And right now, they're being used for control with like these ideas of like risk and speed. It's like we have urgency, but where we say we don't have time versus we do have time does not help us create collaboration or share power, right? We use these to say we don't have time to incorporate more young people. We don't have the resources to do that. It's too much of a risk. it's too disruptive, which is just, again, what you're talking about, this kind of institutional and like adult bias that like we just
It's
don't
a
want to change.
choice.
It's
It's
a
a
choice.
choice.
You
It's
can change if you want to change. We all get to decide that
exactly.
every day in big and small ways, right?
Yeah.
And but we always, it's like we ask young people, we ask society to be patient. We say not yet, it's too complicated, but like it's just a different practice, right? Like power sharing is, again, love in practice. It's
Mhm.
transparency, investment, accountability to the people most impacted. I think that's what makes change durable. And even as I say that, I'm like, it's about the fundamental belief that people have the ability to engage in that.
Yeah.
That transparency is a gift. It's not like, oh, we're giving people too much that they can't handle. Do we need to support people? What are the right ways that we level set so we're all entering in the same way? We give people room to learn, to try, to practice, to be vulnerable, to take a misstep. Even those missteps unlock a whole new kind of round of learning, right? Like, it's not about perfection. It's about the exploration and how we do this co-creation together. Like the messiness of it, which is like people are very averse to that. They want the order, but the messiness of it is actually where all of those gems get discovered.
To your point earlier, it's about the journey, right? And if you roll down a road in California, sometimes there's some potholes, sometimes there's some hydroplanes, sometimes there's some street signs that might not be visible, etc. However, we move with intentionality, we move with direction and a goal in mind. And as long as we keep pushing, keep moving towards this, um, not destination, but towards the evolving collective vision that we have,
Yeah.
right? That we can share and say that since we've co designed this, because I value your lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know your lived experience actually is the wisdom that is essential to us re architecting what life in California, in our communities and neighborhoods, and even across our nation could look like. I am going to make sure that there's a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why Leaders Up, we designed the LA Economic Empowerment Alliance as a vehicle for us to really ensure that every young person across LA County has the opportunity, have the access, have the supports to pursue their educational aspirations and economic potential. So they can experience the economic power that will just simply lead them towards experiencing generational wealth, but generational and communal well being, which is moving the goalposts further down. We want folks to be well. If I'm well physically, mentally, I can do well academically and from a professional and career standpoint. Those things are symbiotic experiences. And let's put on our imagination cap for a moment. And the last question that I have for you is that you've been working with us to design the inner workings of the LA Economic Empowerment Alliance, particularly these future maker studios, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Say we had Dr. King participate in a dream session for a future maker studio. What would you think that he would say he dreamed about for young people as it relates to really, moving beyond survival and thriving to this whole, true goal of holistic well-being and flourishing? You,
Mm-hmm.
your righteous, rage and indignation and visionary cap. What would you think that Dr. King would say?
And you sat with me in these dream sessions. And you're like, I love these. I'm like, the big question. And then I'm like, what would he say? I mean, wow. You know, Dr. King is was a strategist.
Hmm.
He was so good at like continuing like coalition building, bringing people together. I think, he'd right now really be challenging us and asking us to tell the truth and
Mm,
to build power, right?
mm,
To name young Black and Brown people explicitly, which feels like it's like continuing to feel threatening. But like, how do we, as you started this, like, how are we bold to like name explicitly? Because again, we can't repair or undo what we're not naming. I think he'd ask us what we're changing in the rules of the economy, right? This idea of like, we get to decide every day. How are we using that power to choose and decide something different around wages, hiring standards, right? Like he's also a pragmatist. Like, how does this like practically come out? Um, he And I think he would be reminding us we got to go back to love, that it is not a slogan, right?
yeah.
Like we see love in policy, in practice, and in accountability that's measured in outcomes, right? Like if we truly want to step into the practice of love, how do we look at our policies? How do we look at the rules of the economy? Are they actually made in love or in power over? And I think he would really press us
Mm,
on where our moral courage is translated into material change, right? Like
mm,
hope is not passive, it's disciplined. So
right.
this is about pushing forward together. It means we stop mistaking pilot programs for transformation,
Mm,
right? And we choose a few non negotiables and we drive to institutionalize them, right? It's like, what are you willing to change? Not just what are you willing to say?
mm, mm. That's tremendously resonates with me. And, you know, I believe that in the way that we're leading as inclusive leaders, where we're normalizing safety, making opportunity equitable, sharing power, and leading intentionally with love as a practice and a discipline is part of that moral compass that Dr. King will continue to ask us to calibrate. And what inspires me about the work of Dr. King is that he realized as a leader that sharing power was essential. When we
Mm,
think about what Bayard Rustin did in order to organize and execute the tremendous March on Washington, when we think about the connectivity of Ella Baker's leadership in really driving more youth power building, and how SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, actually shined a light and brought to the television screen the detrimental, horrendous, and almost, quite frankly, symmetrical things that are happening to Black and Brown and immigrant bodies now that was happening then for the fight for civil rights. You know, he created that big tent, you know, and work to develop a shared vision with demands that
that's
would help us resist the undoing and actively participate in the redesign, the reconstruction, the re envisioning. Um, Christina, I'm so thankful that you were able to join us
beautiful.
for Lead the Shift, because this is an important, timely conversation. Because as we continue to push forward to build an economy that where young people can lead, learn, and thrive in, it's super important that we come together and share best practices, key learnings from experts like yourselves, but most importantly, for leaders like you that lean in to learn. And I'm thankful that I was able to spend this time with you to learn more from your work, from your vision. And I'm looking forward to us leaving this world better than what we found it. Thank you so much for your time, Christina, and thank you for joining Lead the Shift.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate you.
I'm shifting to the future now.